afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the LUI War Prize, Prize for World Civilization Laureate Public Lecture 2017 at the University of Hong Kong. May I invite Professor Paul Tam, Provost of the University, to deliver a welcoming address. Professor Tam, please.
On behalf of the University of Hong Kong, a very warm welcome to you all. It is a privilege for the university to host this laureate public lecture of the LUI Prize for World Civilization. The prize was established by the distinguished entrepreneur, philanthropist, and avid supporter of education in Hong Kong, Dr. LUI, whom we are proud to call an honorary university fellow and an honorary graduate of this university. The LUI Prize is the first of its kind international cross-sector award honoring and recognizing individuals or organizations that have selflessly contributed to world civilization with their work, their values, and their lives. It is very gratifying to see that this year's LUI Prize in the Welfare Betterment category has been awarded to Landesa, an international non-governmental organization that fights poverty and provides opportunity and security for poor, rural women, men, and communities through the power of land rights. Landesa was founded in 1967 by Professor Roy Prosterman as the Rural Developmental Institute, the world's first non-governmental organization designed specifically for partnering with governments to extend land rights to the world's poorest people. We are very pleased to have Professor Prosterman here with us today. Welcome and thank you. We're also very pleased to have Landesa's co-founder and senior advisor, Mr. Tim Hanstead, who will deliver this laureate public lecture here. Landesa promotes the idea of land to the tiller through partnering with governments and civil society organizations in developing countries and using laws and policies as systemic tools to help the rural poor gain secure land rights. To date, after 50 years of steadfast efforts, it has succeeded in securing land rights for more than 120 million of the world's poorest families in over 50 countries through peaceful means. Here in Hong Kong, many of us will have certain preconceived ideas about our relationship with land, its availability, or rather the lack of it, and the impossible cost of it. These are, of course, the perspectives of people living in cities and what the term land rights means to us. So it is very timely and important to be able to hear from Mr. Hanstead and learn about the fundamental background and meaning of land rights with the benefit of economic history, impact studies, and Landesa's decades of experience. By exploring the what, why, and how of secure and equitable land rights, he will show us the link between land rights and some of the planet's most formidable challenges, including poverty, food security, conflict, climate change, economic growth, and inequality. Here at the University of Hong Kong, one of our top priorities is to create opportunities for the very best academic talents to excel so that they can advance their scholarship at the highest level, open up the bounds of human knowledge, and, like Mr. Hanstead and his colleagues at Landesa, make a positive and lasting difference to society and humanity. As Asia's global university, Hong Kong U focuses on what we call the 3+1 I's: internationalization, innovation, and interdisciplinarity, all converging on impact. These themes will guide all the teaching and learning, research, and knowledge exchange components of our work. And in this way, the university will seek to serve the needs of society and create a positive impact in everything we do. My grateful thanks to Dr. LUI and the board of the prize for their support to the university, and my congratulations to all those involved in this important and memorable occasion. Please join me again in welcoming Mr. Tim Hanstead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Tam. Thank you very much, Mr. Hanstead, for coming all the way here to Hong Kong and share with us.
Thank you very much. Professor Tam, the members of the LUI family, and also Mr. Prosterman and Mr. Hanstead. I'm honored to have the opportunity to provide a brief background to the Luigi Wu Prize, the Prize for World Civilization. The LUI Prize was established by Dr. Luigi Wu on 24 September 2015. It is an annual, first-of-its-kind, international and cross-sector award for advancing world civilization and inspiring people to build a better and more harmonious world. The LUI Prize is open to the entire world and to people from all walks of life, and is not limited to academics, professionals, and scientists like some other prizes we know. The LUI Prize is awarded in 3 separate categories each year, and each of the 3 prizes can be awarded to either a single individual or a single organization. The first LUI Prize category is the sustainable development of the world, with the prize referred to as the Sustainability Prize. The objective of the Sustainability Prize is to recognize the recipient with outstanding contributions to the maintenance of a sustainable ecological balance in the world and the provision for the needs of future generations. The second prize category is the betterment of the welfare of mankind, with the prize referred to as the Welfare Betterment Prize. The objective of the Welfare Betterment Prize is to acknowledge the outstanding efforts and achievements of the recipient in enhancing the well-being of the human race. The third prize category is the promotion of positive life attitude and enhancement of positive energy, with the prize referred to as the Positive Energy Prize. This is an innovation of Mr. Luigi Wu. And I don't know of any other prize that has a similar orientation. The objective of the Positive Energy Prize is to honor a recipient for the adoption of a positive life attitude and the unwavering determination to make constructive changes in the face of setbacks, hardships, and adversities. Each year, the Prize Council selects a specific area of focus under each prize category. In 2017, for the Welfare Betterment Prize, the specific area of focus is the alleviation of poverty. And the laureate, as you know, is Landesa, a non-governmental organization in the United States. Mr. Tim Hanstead, co-founder and senior advisor of Landesa, is the lecturer for this afternoon. For the Sustainability Prize, the specific area of focus is the prevention of climate change, and the laureate is Mr. Xie Zhenhua. For the Positive Energy Prize, the specific area of focus is the promotion of harmony amongst diverse groups, and the laureate is the International Paralympic Committee, an international non-governmental organization based in Germany. Both Mr. Xie as well as Sir Philip Craven, who is the president of the International Paralympic Committee, they have both given their lectures, and today we're waiting to hear from Tim Hanstead. Tim, please.
Imagine living on less than $2 a day. Could you feed your family? Send your children to school? Plan their future? This is the reality for 1 billion people around the world.
Land is the key source of income, nutrition, status, empowerment. It is the principal source of livelihood and well-being for still about half of the world's population, and importantly, for more than 3/4 of the poor people on the planet, agriculture is their means of livelihood, and the relationship to the land is absolutely critical to their status, their security, and indeed the lives of their children.
Since 1970, Landesa has been creating pro-poor land law programs for tenant farmers, which espouses the idea of land to the tiller. Only secure land rights can alleviate poverty.
So we envision a world free of poverty in which all men and women who depend on land for their livelihoods have secure legal title to that land. And we champion land rights for millions of the poorest men and women around the world in order to increase opportunities and promote social justice.
Inspired by Roy Prosterman, his mentor and professor, Tim Hanstad joined in 1986 and became the co-founder of Landesa.
Landesa realized some time back that changing land rights to strengthen the rights of the world's poor wasn't enough because women were not sharing equally in those benefits, and that women are often the critical key to development. We have taken a very deliberate approach to ensuring that a gender equality and women's rights, when women in particular have their land strengthened, that empowers women dramatically. That leads to giving them a voice in their communities, better outcomes for the family. So all sorts of ripple effects for the family itself, but then also for society at large. Land has a tremendous impact on deforestation, on climate change, on conflict, on rule of law.
I mean, it's always really impressive to hear the beneficiaries themselves speak to why the kind of work we're doing with their government or with civil society organizations is making a difference for them. So, for example, when I was in India, we went to a women's support center and watched live a kind of training for women about their legal rights to land. It included not just land rights, but also tactics for them to feel comfortable and feel empowered and not afraid to speak to men and to officials about their land rights.
When it comes to inheritance, we have very progressive laws and policies in India that allow women to inherit land. The patriarchy, the social norms do not allow women to inherit land. So our role as Landesa, we try to provide land literacy, try to make the women aware about their rights. We're also trying to provide the government officials to build their capacity, make them aware why it's needed to basically focus on women.
Landesa 可以说是最先在国内提出妇女土地权益问题。我们在对土地登记的是开始之前，我们就向有关部门就建议，你总得要把妇女的名字要列在你这个土地登记的权利的证书上面。
随着中国经济的逐步发展，我们的更多的把重点呢放在比如说征地、规模经营，所以我们 Landesa 我们还是能够希望在这些领域里面持续的跟中国政府合作，能够给他们提供这方面的政策支持。
Most of our work in Africa has been through invitation by government. We work closely with governments in addition to civil society, both at the national level and then sometimes also at the more local level. In Africa, most of the land is held in customary land tenure systems. There aren't formal titles that many of us might be used to having, but rather land is controlled by customary groups of people that have used the land for many, many years. But in Africa, one thing that we find is that there are tremendous energy by women and men on the ground who are fighting for proactive change.
Our most immediate target right now is Myanmar, where we see huge opportunities. We are also building out our work in sub-Saharan Africa. We've just set up an office in Tanzania. We're increasing work across a number of countries in East Africa and some in West Africa. So those are also high priorities for us.
Although we've had considerable success and reached perhaps 120 million households with secure land rights over the 50 years of our work, I suspect there may be another 50 years of work to be done before we can say that virtually everyone on the planet has secure rights to the land on which they depend for their livelihood. So perhaps will not be around for the next 50 years, but hopefully Landesa will be around for the next 50 years. And by all means, persist, be stubborn, stay with it.
Good afternoon, Professor Prosterman and Mr. Tim Hansted, distinguished guests. It is my honor to introduce the speaker, co-founder and senior advisor of Landesa, which you have just saw on the screen. It's very interesting to read through and understand the activities of this wonderful organization and its contribution to alleviating poverty. Mr. Tim Hansted was a law student when he first joined with Roy Prosterman, who is here with us, in his mission to strengthen land rights for the rural poor. And poverty, of course, in an industrialized world is heavily concentrated among the rural parts of the world. Mr. Hansted has been instrumental in formal founding of Landesa, then the Rural Development Institute, helping it to grow from a two-person operation run out of the University of Washington's Law School to a leading top human rights NGO with more than 150 staff around the world. As Landesa's co-founder and senior advisor, Hansted serves as a global ambassador to the organization and helps guide conversations about how global efforts on extreme poverty, gender equality, food security, and environmental stewardship can benefit from incorporating a land rights lens. He's a member of the executive leadership team and contributes to Landesa's programs by building the capacity of staff in our field offices. His international work experience spans more than 18 countries around the world, particularly Asia, Eastern Europe, Africa, and Latin America. And for many years, he had helped launch and grow Landesa's India program. And as you've seen from the video, also instrumental in providing stewardship in China. He has more than 25 years of work experience in a nonprofit leadership, social entrepreneurship, advocacy, project management, research, training, and writing on land rights and international development. With 150 staff, this is what we would call a highly leveraged organization in terms of the impact it makes on the world. Hansted is also a Skoll Foundation Social Entrepreneur Awardee, a World Economic Forum Social Entrepreneur, and a member of the Clinton Global Initiative, World Economic Forum, Global Agenda Council on Food Security, and the Global Washington Board of Directors. He has written many books, and I'm really glad to know, he is still involved with academia at the University of Washington School of Law. With that, may I invite Professor Hansted to grace this podium and share with us your thoughts and especially your experience. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's a very kind introduction. It's an honor and a privilege to be here today. I want to recognize and thank the generosity and the visionary leadership of Dr. Lui. It is a really incredible privilege that we have been named to receive this prize, and I also want to thank his family. I know is represented here by Mr. Philip Cheng. We have here the chair and the members of the prize committee, professors. Dr. Moses Cheng, to Professors Lau, Professors Lucas, Professor Ye. Members of the selection panel, Professors Chen and Professor May. I want to thank our hosts, Hong Kong University, Professors Tam, Professors Ao, Professor Tsai, and Professor Huang. Before I start, I also have to give a nod to my mentor and my colleague now for more than 31 years, Professor Roy Prosterman, who remains our guiding light at Landesa and who shows us every day that age is no barrier to inspiration, to motivation. He continues to work. He just spent last week in Myanmar traipsing around the field, doing field work, doing our work there. Also my colleague Tyler, who's here, my wife and life partner and a real partner in this work, Chitra Hanstead, who remains an inspiration. And finally, I know this is a long list of thank yous, but I also have to thank Vicki Lee and her team from the prize. They have been fabulous and have treated us like royalty for the week. And I told her the only problem with how she's treated us is when we go back home, we're just going to feel let down not being treated like that when we get back to the U.S. So thank you. We as a global community, as nations, as citizens, are not going to be able to effectively address the great global challenges of poverty, of food security, of gender inequality, of sluggish economic growth, and of climate change unless we get land rights right. Our topic today is land rights, and specifically land rights that are strong and land rights that are broadly available across all economic and social classes. Such land rights are foundational, but they are an under-recognized building block for alleviating poverty and for building prosperous and peaceful societies. As I think you saw in the video, it said 3/4 of the world's poorest people still live in rural areas, where land is the most important asset, where land is the source of food, of income, of wealth, of power, of credit, of status. And most of the poorest are poor because they lack secure rights to that most important asset. People are surprised to know that only 30% of the world's surface, land surface, is actually legally documented and titled. And that creates an obstacle not only for the poorest, but for all of us. Its negative impact spans both rural and urban areas, and from the poorest people to the affluent. Today, I'm going to provide an introduction of the what, the why, and the how of secure land rights. That is, what are land rights and what is the scope of the problem? Why are land rights important for poverty alleviation, for building peaceful and prosperous societies? And how can we help to ensure that land rights are strong and broadly distributed across all social and economic classes? Let's start with the scope of the problem. So approximately 540 million households, that's more than 2.5 billion people, around the world are still defined as poor, that is, living on less than about $3 a day. And about 2/3 of them, that's 360 million households, don't have secure legal rights to land. Of those 360 million households, about 1/3 of those are in urban areas and about 2/3 in rural areas. And of those in rural areas, more than 85% are concentrated in sub-Saharan Africa, in India, and in China. Now, those who do not have secure legal rights to land can be divided broadly into two categories. And it's important to understand these categories when we get to the how. First, some of them are absolutely landless. These are people who, if you ask them if they have any land, they would say no, we don't have any land. They are absolutely landless. Most of them work as wage laborers in the fields of others or as sharecroppers. Then there's a second group that we call insecure possessors. These are people who, if you ask them if they have land, they would say, yes, we have land on which we live or on which we farm. But if you dove deeper, you would find that their rights to that land are very weak. They are not legally secure. They often live on land that's claimed by the government or land that has never been surveyed or titled. That second group is actually larger than the first group, but the first group is generally poorer than the second group. So that's the big picture. Now, what does this look like at the individual level, the personal level? Because we can talk about statistics, but these statistics actually represent people. They represent actual human lives. I want to tell you, give you brief pictures of three people from different countries. First, Pranu. Pranu is a young widow with three children who I met in a village in Andhra Pradesh, India. Several years ago, she and her children were mired in poverty, lacking hope and a future. Like most of the world's poorest, Pranu shared three traits. She lived in a village. She relied on land for her livelihood, but she did not own land. Without land, she lacked reliable access to food, to income, to credit, to school, to government programs. The coins she earned each day from working on the land of others was not enough to provide sufficient food for her family. Pranu and her family were absolutely landless. And I'm going to come back to Pranu a bit later to explain how her life was changed. In Uganda, I met Esther and her husband. They are an example of insecure possessors. They have access to some land, but very weak rights to that land. They, together with their children, farm a few acres of land, but their rights are not secure. Their rights are rooted in custom, and they are neither clear nor are they legally documented. Their tribal elders make the decisions, and sometimes arbitrarily, of who gets access to land, who gets to farm on it from year to year. The government has never documented or titled the land in their village. And Esther and her husband worry every day that someone will grab their land. Someone maybe within their community or someone from the outside. They lack the incentive to make long-term investments on their land. Esther acknowledged to me that they could grow much more on their land if they had some irrigation, and that it was possible to get irrigation to their land from if they were to build a tube well on that land. But as she explained, there's no reason for them to make that substantial investment in resources because they may lose the land. They've even thought about selling their land, but without legal documents, no one is willing to pay much for it. No one is willing to offer them credit based on their rights to the land. Esther and her family live a vulnerable and insecure existence. And unfortunately, they are not alone. There are hundreds of millions of others across Asia, across Africa, across Latin America in particular, that live or farm land that they don't own. They lack title. They hold it insecurely, and they worry about losing it. Yang Weibao is a farmer we met in southwestern China. he had been farming about an acre of farmland and collecting valuable non-timber forest products from 2 acres of forest land. This was land that, while collectively owned, had been assigned to his and his family's use. According to China's government policy, he had received 30-year use rights to the farmland and 50-year use rights to the forest land. But the government had never issued formal land contracts or certificates to Mr. Yang. And one day, he learned that his forest land had been given for use to a multinational, very large paper company without his consent or his knowledge. He received no compensation, and he lost a significant portion of his family income when he lost use of that land. Now, unfortunately, these stories are all too common. Poor rural people who are either absolutely landless or use land for which they hold weak land rights. Their best opportunity for pulling themselves out of poverty to putting their families on a better economic trajectory lies in having secure legal rights to that most important asset. So, what are land rights, and what makes them secure or strong? Simply put, land rights are socio-legal relationships among people to land property. And again, when those rights are strong, when they are broadly distributed across society, across an economy, good things happen. Poverty alleviation progresses, peaceful and prosperous societies are built. But what makes land rights strong? What are strong land rights compared to weak land rights? At Landesa, we often talk about 5 characteristics that makes land rights strong. One is that they are legally recognized. That is, laws, policies, regulations uphold the rights to land no matter the person's economic or social status. The second is that they're socially recognized. That is, the families, the community, and the broader society actually accepts the rights. Third, they are enforced by external authorities. If the government or some other more powerful authority is not ready and able to enforce the rights, then the rights are weak or maybe don't exist at all. Fourth, the rights are long-term. That is, they must be secure and long-term enough to receive returns on investments from the land. And this doesn't necessarily require perpetual rights. That is, people often, I think, make the mistake that it's only private ownership or only perpetual rights that are legally secure. In fact, one can develop and create secure legal rights on land no matter what the ownership regime. It can be done under state ownership, it can be done under collective ownership, it can be done under private ownership. I mentioned earlier the 30-year rights in China. If those rights were actually enforced, and you look at the economic and social value of a 30-year rights, it's actually not that much different than a perpetual right. So fifth, in addition to those 4 legally recognized, socially recognized, enforceable by authorities, long-term, there's also appropriately transferable. So this is context specific, but the ability to make or prevent transfers by sale, by lease, by inheritance, by mortgage, has very important implications for economic empowerment and for transformation. So why are land rights important? Just to be a bit repetitive for what you've already heard, but to review. Nearly 3/4 of the world's poorest people live in rural areas. Most of them don't have secure rights to land. if we care about poverty, if we are going to address poverty at scale, we have to think about land rights. And again, 70% of the world's land is undocumented. That actually includes 90% of the rural land in Africa. It's not legally documented or titled. And as I've said, and now we'll get into a bit more, when poor people and communities have secure rights to land, good things happen. And there's growing evidence from studies, social science studies, economic studies, that show this. Studies demonstrate that when people gain secure legal rights to land, they are willing to make the productivity-enhancing investments. So investments increase, which increases yields, which increases income, which increases wealth. In many settings, obtaining legally documented rights to land provides access to credit. It provides access to government services, to crop insurance, to input subsidies, even tuition waivers, even infrastructure. Studies show that secure land rights increases returns to labor. When the only method you have of protecting your property rights is actually defending, that is not leaving your land, your returns to labor are not going to be as good because you don't want to leave your land. Studies show that secure land rights reduces conflict. There's a lot of conflict in the world that's caused by uncertain, unclear rights to land, or that's caused by inegalitarian distribution of land. Secure legal rights increases environmentally friendly practices to land. And it's really important, I think as was shown in the video earlier, that who within the household holds rights to land. That is, it's not enough to focus just on the household as a unit. Who within the household holds rights is important. And the evidence shows that when women share in legal rights to land, even more good things happen. Income and yields go up even more. Women gain more voice in the household and in the community. And when women have more voice in the household, a larger share of the household income is actually spent on children's welfare and nutrition. This is not, I mean, it's pretty consistent finding throughout the world, and it's not exactly, doesn't shine a favorable light on us males. Also, there's evidence showing that when women share in legal rights, that domestic violence within the household decreases. Now, so far the evidence I've been talking about really looks at the micro level. That is, what are the impacts of secure land rights on the household or on individuals? And that relates largely to the strong or the strength of the rights as part of, if we talk about strong rights and broadly distributed rights. But what about the broadly distributed part? I stated earlier that strong and broadly distributed rights are a building block for prosperous and peaceful societies. And the evidence shows that when strong rights are broadly distributed and broadly available throughout the society, to the relatively poorest as well as to the affluent, broad economic growth is faster. Societal violence and crime rates are lower. Societal investments in education are higher. In short, economies, societies are more likely to be prosperous and peaceful. You know, if we look historically, going back to the last century, it was land rights reforms in Japan, in South Korea, in the island of Taiwan, following World War II, and actually more recently in China, which I'll get to, in mainland China, that have helped put their economies on different trajectories than other economies in the region. Joe Studwell, an author of a book called How Asia Works, highlights these processes, and I recommend this book to you if you haven't already read it, How Asia Works by Joe Studwell. There's also a Harvard historian, Neil Ferguson, who points to 6 institutions that he says largely describe the difference between high-income and low-income economies, that is, the performance there. In his TED Talk, which you can get online, he calls those 6 institutions the 6 killer apps. And one of those apps, one of those institutions, is property rights. And he highlights particularly land property rights. Ferguson points to not only how those rights are defined, but how they are distributed throughout society. And there's many historical examples of that. One that he points to is the different economic trajectories of South America to North America, which is traced in part to how the colonial rulers treated land rights and distributed land rights. They were much, much more concentrated and inegalitarian in South America, which held back economic progress. Others have pointed to differences in the Philippines and compared the Philippines' progress, generally slower progress than economies around it, tracing it back to how they treated land property rights during the colonial period, which set it on a different path. Between Western and Eastern Europe, how in Western Europe, feudalism declined more rapidly and property rights generally became more available sooner in Western Europe than they did in Eastern Europe, which helped explain the difference on the economic trajectory of those 2 regions. The recent history of China, I think, also actually may be one of the best examples of the role of strong and broadly distributed land rights and how it makes a difference in people's lives and across the economy as a whole. As most of you know, or probably know, more people have been pulled out of poverty in rural China in the last 35 years than in any other period in human history, any other area in human history. So within our lifetime, or at least the lifetime of most of us, some are younger, maybe it started before your lifetime, we have seen the most successful experience of poverty alleviation in human history. And it's happened in mainland China, and it was built on the foundation of a rural land rights reform called the Household Responsibility System. Roy and I had the privilege of, in the mid-1980s, of starting work in China and spending days, weeks, months interviewing farmers from around China who had recently had their farming transformed from a communal collective farm system to a family farm system. We have never talked to so many happy farmers in our lives. They explained how on the collective farm, essentially their work was not tied to their income at all. You had these very, very large farms where teams were sent out, on different fields, and they explained how they really had no incentive to work hard. In fact, there was an incentive not to work hard. And when, over the period of about 3 years, 1980 to 1983, when the economy started opening up and the household responsibility system was implemented, virtually every rural Chinese household was given about 1.5 acres of land. And while they had to give a certain amount of their crop, a fixed amount, to the government, whatever they produced beyond that, they were allowed to keep. And that completely changed their incentives. And you saw the yields of major grain crops in China increase 50% very, very rapidly in the early 80s. And the incomes of farmers grow. What is less recognized, but was made clear in our research, is that farmers were also spending a lot less time on the farm. So they were spending 300 plus days a year on the farm in the communal period, being much less productive, when through our research and our studies, we were finding they were spending something more like 70 days a year on the farm, getting 50% higher yields, higher incomes, and having all of that additional labor freed up to spend much of it on non-agricultural work through the township and village enterprises. It just unleashed an enormous amount of economic energy. So given all of this evidence that's out there in this growing literature about how secure and broadly distributed land rights can change lives, can change societies, why has the problem persisted? And we'll get a little bit to the how here. In short, the problem persists because many governments have not developed and implemented the legal and institutional frameworks necessary to ensure broad-based and strong land rights. I mean, that's a simple way of putting it, but it's a way that we look at it and it helps informs how we approach it. Importantly here, solutions do exist. Our organization, Landesa, as you've already heard, has used a system change model at the country level. In country by country, we have worked with governments to help change and help implement laws that provide secure legal rights to poor women, men, and communities. And Landesa's country-level work involves 4 components. First, we undertake an enormous amount of desk and field research to identify the problems and the possible solutions. Research is key. It's important to say on a university campus. Second, we use these research findings, working with local stakeholders and against the background of our comparative experience in dozens of countries, to design a menu of possible policy and legislative solutions to the challenges that are identified. Third, we often are able to increase a government's willingness to act by using the data and by making under-recognized connections to reframe the value proposition for reform. And finally, where lack of implementation of policies and of laws is a constraint, Landesa helps governments design and pilot scalable models and also helps train government officials. So earlier I mentioned Pranu in India, who was landless and mired in poverty. Landesa was invited by Pranu's government to design laws in a land program. And that program helped Pranu and thousands of other landless women purchase land. And the results were transformational for Pranu and for so many others. After purchasing land, and for Pranu it was about just under an acre of land, on which she grows rice and vegetables, Pranu and her children for the first time consistently ate 3 meals a day. Pranu took her children out of the fields and into the classroom. She started earning and saving for a better future. And most importantly, Pranu told me, she earned dignity. She started being treated in her village as a somebody. She gained confidence. She gained a voice in her community. And it's interesting because as researchers, we're often very interested in looking at the impacts of secure land rights, and I've cited many of the studies that look at them. And often in doing these interviews, we'll find, increases in income, eating more food, getting better access to credit or to services. And then we ask questions about kind of voice in the community or things that are proxies for status or dignity. And those often come up too. And when respondents provide several of those things, and then you ask them to, which are the most important? The most common answer is that dignity, that status, that it's an empowerment. And it's something I think we as researchers don't capture very well. It's much easier to capture the income, the yields, the other things. But actually what's most important to most respondents is that now I hold my head up high. Now I feel like somebody. Now I feel like it's agency. I'm more in control of my future. So Landesa was founded on a radical but a simple idea that governments are often willing but typically lack a practical roadmap for providing access and secure land rights to their poorest and most land insecure. And that approach at the country level has been our core approach. Over the years, as you've heard earlier, we've had the privilege of working with many governments around the world on reforms that have provided secure legal rights to land now to more than 130 million families. And as I wrap up here, I want to share with you a short video. This is about a 5-minute video that shows how it worked in one particular country.
bisobanuye ko utabasha kuba wamenya amategeko byoroshye mu buryo bworoshye kuba umugabo ari we uri hejuru yawe kuba uhura n'ibibazo by'abana kurusha umugabo akenshi hari ubwo bigira ingaruka no ku bana bafite abana ntibabashe kujya mu ishuri mu rugo hakaba umutekano muke ugasanga urugo ntirutera imbere tugejeje guhindura ibyo byose kugira ngo umugore wo mu cyaro abashe gutera imbere ubwo umugabo wanjye atamuha ubwo burenganzira ku butaka twari dufite amahoro make kuko twahoraga duhanganye nta n'ibyo kurya byabonekaga bihagije n'abana nta n'ubwo bigaga neza kuko twahoraga dutwanira ubutaka twari turi aho mbega nta mahoro dufite muri twe
gufata nk'umurima nkawugurisha tutabyemeranyije icyo gihe amakimbirane akavuga umwana w'umukobwa nawe namufata nta burenganzira namuhaga kimwe n'umuhungu kuko nabonaga umuhungu ari we ufite uburenganzira kurusha umukobwa kumva ko umugore agomba kugira uburenganzira ku butaka kubyakira ntabwo byari binyoroheye nasanze hari inyungu bifitemo ndetse bifitiye n'umuryango wayo murafatanya mukawubyaza umusaruro mufatanyirije hamwe
kandi abana banjye bariga neza nta kibazo mituweli nyirihira igihe ndaho ndatuje muri rusange igihe kizaza ndateganya iterambere rirenze aho ndi kuzigisha abana banjye bakarangiza ndetse nanjye nkagira ubuzima bwiza muri rusange mu gihe ndi gukora aka kazi ndishima cyane kubera ko abagore mpagarariye mba mbona bafite ubumenyi bari kubona kandi mba mbona bari kubasha kwitera imbere kubera ubumenyi nabagejejeho
Getting land rights right is a fundamental building block for alleviating poverty and for building peaceful and prosperous societies. I hope if you walked into this auditorium, maybe not recognizing that. As was said earlier, often we who live in urban areas, who live in high-income economies, I find this is often a blind spot because we don't recognize the importance of agriculture, or because we live in societies where that legal and institutional infrastructure already exists. And where it already exists, just like the infrastructure in this building, it's invisible. You don't have to think about it. It's just there. For most people in the world, it's not there. But it is possible. Solutions exist. There's many stakeholders who have a role, most importantly government, but also NGOs, also academia, also the business sector. Landesa's experience shows that bringing all of these different stakeholders together is the best way, perhaps, to make progress. And being on a university campus, too, I can't help but remind you all that Landesa was actually incubated within a university. It's only because of a university that Landesa exists. And there are still roles. We still work a lot with universities, with faculty members like those in the room, with students as interns and otherwise. I was a student. For the students in the room, think about how you can use your university education in a way that not only betters yourself, but betters your broader society, betters your world. There are opportunities out there to do that. See, I'll just say two things in closing. In all of the traveling and the work that I've done around the world, I've noticed a couple of things. One is that talent, innovation, work ethic, hard work is pretty broadly distributed around the world. You find it in roughly equal proportions, at least I have, everywhere I go. What's not broadly distributed and evenly distributed is opportunity. It's very unequal. And for most of the world's poorest, land, secure land rights, is the best platform for their opportunity. You know, there's an old maxim that it is better to teach a person how to fish than to give them a fish. You've all heard that, right? At Landesa, we take that a bit further, because it's not just about teaching them how to fish. We ask the question, who owns the pond? Thank you.
Professor Huang and Mr. Hanstead.
Well, let me say it was very enjoyable. It was very enjoyable because for the first time I was in the audience when somebody talked about poverty and about poverty around the world, and had a lot to do with land rights, nutrition, food, women rights. Actually, I teach that in the Common Core at Hong Kong University, and I talk about all of that each year to about 120 students. So I've asked Tim to let me have your lecture, your speech, and the video so that I can show my students and I could not work so hard. Please, questions from the audience. But I would like to assure Tim that property rights, and not just private property rights, the study of property rights is actually very, very much at heart of the Faculty of Business and Economics at the University of Hong Kong. One of our former professors actually was professor of economics at the University of Washington Department of Economics, and who, when he arrived, spearheaded a change of the high secondary school curriculum so that students learn about property rights. Right? And I think, who actually wrote a book, Why China Will Go Capitalist? So it was, so you have come to the right place, and we're really glad that you're here. We fully support everything you do, and we can help in any way other than offering the prize, but we'll hope to have you back and speak to our students too. Hands up. Yes, question there. A lady at the back, yes.
Thank you. My name is Sue Cham, and I'm very moved by the talk. I have a comment and a question. My comment is that Landesa is truly deserving of the prize. It's a wonderful. I'm sort of feeling very emotional about it because it's really what we need, to look back on land rights. My grandmother was one of those farmers, no rights to land, and she brought up 16 kids. So it's very moving. I think it's wonderful that you deserve that prize. Thank you. My question is about the visit to Myanmar, to Burma, and you said you all were there, and it's like, has the Burmese government got that right? Why the Rohingyas are still in such a desperate situation with having become refugees? Is it because it's not been worked out properly in terms of land rights in Burma? Is that so much at stake that even the UN has been criticized? What do people like us in Asia, Asians, who are concerned about displacement and poor people and all that it can happen there? So that's my question. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the comment and the question. Just on the comment, it's really interesting because I often find that for most people, if you look back in your family history, you will find a point at which that involves land property in some way, sometimes negative, sometimes positive, that kind of changes the trajectory of a family, economic and social history. And I don't know, I have the same in my family as well. On the question, actually, really we should have Professor Prosterman answer the question because he has been much more involved with the situation in Myanmar, and so I might just hand him the mic after I give you a short answer. What is happening in Rakhine State is certainly horrific. As people who are very interested and concerned about human rights, it's terrible to see. It's not the full story of what's happening throughout the country. Our work actually in Myanmar is not in Rakhine State, so we haven't been able to see that up close. The government is, of course we know governments are not monolithic, but the government on the one hand, while the military is undertaking these abuses, there is land reform progress being made throughout much of the rest of the country. That's not to excuse it, and you can't overshadow the bad by having good things happen, but it is important to know that that it's not happening throughout the country. But it is horrific. I mean, my wife Chitra runs one of the largest refugee resettlement organizations, and watched those refugees crossing into Bangladesh and into other countries. Yeah, no other way to describe it than horrific. But if you don't mind, if it's okay, please, Professor, if I just hand it to...
Returned from my 8th trip to Myanmar during the course of the last 3 years. I think it's always important to bear in mind that governments always don't behave in a simple, monolithic way. what is actually going on in Myanmar, in addition to the horrible events involving Rakhine and Rohingya. The problem in that part of the country is one that has long historical roots. And one of the difficulties is the lady, Aung San Suu Kyi, of course, is heading the first democratic or largely democratic government that country has had in more than half a century. They had military dictatorship for more than 50 years. And I think one concern she undoubtedly must have, because the military controls 3 of the key cabinet positions and a quarter of the legislative seats and all of the national security aspects in the country are still in the hands of the military, which drafted the current constitution in such a way as to maintain great power. It would be easy to act in a way, I fear, which could trigger a military coup and a return to military dictatorship. It has to be something that she is concerned about. At the same time that whole problematic issue exists for the Rakhine and the travel, the grave problems that exist across the border with Bangladesh. It is important to recognize that they are now in the process of carrying out what could quite easily become the 6th great Asian land reform of the post-World War II period. Tim has spoken of the land reforms in mainland China, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, also a major land reform. Those great success stories could quite readily be joined over the next several years by a 6th great Asian land reform, that of Myanmar. In fact, we've never seen a government that is as committed to deal with the land issue, including women's land rights, as the government presently in power in Myanmar. So they certainly are to be criticized for the actions in that one province and certainly in the difficulties that they face there, we must, I think, recognize. But at the same time, it is a government which is doing brilliantly pro-poor, pro-women activities on the land issue. So I'm quite hopeful that overall we will see a good outcome. But please do keep in mind the extreme peril in which they operate, in which the democratic government operates in terms of not triggering a return to military dictatorship, and at the same time urge through all means the United Nations and investors, potential investors, keep pressure on, including pressure on the military, to point out to them they're not doing their cause any good whatsoever in the actions that have been taken in the last few weeks since August 25th.
Thank you. Any question? Yeah. The second person and then in some sequence. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Henderson, I want to ask a more conceptual question. when it comes to rural land, I agree entirely 100% with what your organization has been doing. But from a longer-term perspective, in a lot of the heavily populated areas, particularly in Asia, the problem of land rights is that, well, if you have land belonging to the first generation, they have a few children. The next generation will each inherit a smaller plot of land. The third generation will have even more children and even smaller plots of land. And that is a big problem because it is not only not economic, to have smaller and smaller pieces of land, but it is also, it gets into the dynamics of the game of monopoly. Gradually, you are forced to sell your land. Big landowners come up and so on and so forth. So, from a dynamic process, I'm not so sure what kind of experience you could share with us. When land is passed from one generation to another.
I think in a way it's also about the precise rights of inheritance and how this is structured and how well it is enforced.
Yeah, it's certainly inheritance, but also land markets generally. So the trend that you're talking about is one that if we just think about that trend, that and every generation is having more children with the same amount of land, then land parcels are getting smaller and smaller. But there actually is another trend that's happening at the same time in most countries that overtakes that trend, and that's the trend of a shift from labor out of agriculture into higher value parts of the economy. And that trend actually, at some point as economies develop, is actually a more powerful trend. So farm sizes actually get larger, not smaller, as you would expect. And if you think about this that is, as long as people have secure rights to land, which is a prerequisite for a land market, and inheritance kind of happens in a voluntary and roughly equal way. If you think about this on a on a family basis, and again, many of us could probably look at our family history and see this. Most farmers around the world, and we've talked to a lot of them, and one of the questions we often ask is, what are the aspirations for your children? And if you start asking that question to farmers around the world, you'll probably hear what I hear. Almost all of them will say something that doesn't involve agriculture. That is, very few farmers in the world want their children to be farmers. So for them, success means I've educate my children, I've earned enough, educate my children for them to take jobs in something other than farming because it's going to provide them a better economic future. And if they're successful, then there's a question of, well, what happens to that land? Because now I'm successful, my children are working somewhere else, what do I do with my land? If I have secure rights to that land, it's unlikely actually to keep passing it along. I'll lease it probably first and then sell it. There is this, it goes beyond just economic relationship. There's emotional attachments to land that often delays the time at which it's sold. But it typically does then sold, and that money can be used to support the parents in their old age or be used to help facilitate that transition in non-agriculture. So anyway, the point is that trend of people moving out of agriculture actually overtakes the trend of having additional children. I don't know if that helps. But the key is, if you don't have a market where that land can be transferred in some way on a private way, if the state has to do that, you have big problems. And many countries have faced that, and there is some concern about China facing that problem, because the state just does it much more inefficiently than the private market.
Okay, any other question? Yeah, gentleman over there.
Hello. I think it is remarkable that your organization, Landesa, and also Mr. Hester has done a lot for the underdeveloped countries. But as Professor Huang just said, that you come to the right place, and also at the right time, that is Hong Kong. So are you aware that there's many problems, especially regarding the property rights in Hong Kong? And can you give some advice or suggestions to the Hong Kong government that how to help the young people to securing their property rights? Because in Hong Kong, not the land rights, because there's so much land in Hong Kong. So how to advise the Hong Kong government to secure the property rights for the young people so that they can live much happier and also they also enhance their belongings of Hong Kong. Thank you.
It's not exactly a fair question.
Well, no, I'll take the question, but maybe deflect it in a way. So, yeah, so I'm not an expert on Hong Kong's land by any means. A couple of people have mentioned some of the issues while we've been here, and of course, we currently live in Seattle, U.S., which is the fastest growing economically city and land values of anywhere in the United States. So, and we have 4 children, so I have the same concerns about my children in Seattle. They'll never be able to afford property. But I mentioned in Landesa's approach to our work, we focus on rural areas largely because that's where most of the poor are. But one of the key components to our work is doing that desk and field research first, so that we can really understand the ground realities before we provide any advice. So I'd be very hesitant to provide any advice to the Hong Kong government, having not done the desk or the field research.
My question actually follows on, I guess, a little bit neatly from that, in the sense that I think it was in recent years the world's population is now majority living in cities rather than rural areas. So what pressure has Landesa had as an organization in terms of, are you going to continue focusing on rural areas? And if that's a decision you've made, how do you still convince the same level of support, I guess, when it's much more in vogue to talk about how do you improve situations in cities instead? Thank you.
No, that's a great question. Yeah, the world is urbanizing. The trends are for the total population and even for the proportion of poor, it's in rural areas, that is going down. Great organization, by the way, Habitat for Humanity. We partner with Habitat for Humanity International on your Solid Ground campaign and a number of other things, so I'm a big fan. And one of the ways that we're starting to look at urban areas is partnering with groups that are already doing that work, including Habitat for Humanity. And so actually in looking at laws and policies, we often do have to sometimes look at urban, because oftentimes the laws and policies, they don't divide themselves neatly into rural and urban. So yeah, we're aware of the trend. We are looking at it. I think slowly you probably will see us working a bit more in urban areas or shifting. But there are already a lot of good groups working on urban areas, including your own. So we're not diving into that space quickly because our bread and butter still has been rural, and still much of the issue remains there.
Thank you. First of all, congratulations. I'm wondering if you can speak to the issue of land rights in the context of nomadic communities. So you mentioned the great rise out of poverty for many people in China, which I think is largely true in the eastern half of the country. So if you go west, especially I'm thinking of Tibetan communities who are largely nomadic, they haven't experienced that same kind of uplift. So how do you think about populations like that, or Mongolia? And what does that mean in the context of people who move around and aren't stationary?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So sometimes people come away from a talk like this or learning a little bit about Landesa and think it's all about just individual rights, like for cultivated agriculture. But the issues for pastoral communities is quite different, and it often depends much more around group rights and about rights of not what's sometimes called in an Anglo-American law freehold rights, but rights of easement, So I've done actually work in Mongolia and looked at the issues there for pastoral communities, and the rights are complex. I mean, it's certain parts of the season you have to have secure rights to a particular place in order to keep your herds there through the most difficult months. But then, of course, you move and go somewhere else, and those rights are typically group rights based on and somewhat flexible because of the weather variations, and sometimes you may have to move into someone else's group rights. So there are solutions for that without getting into the specifics. They are sometimes complex, and that's why it's so important to understand what are the issues and the objectives. And by the way, for any land rights anywhere, there are both societal issues or kind of broader issues beyond just the individual or the household, and issues for the individual or the household. You have to look at who the main user for that land is and kind of what unit are they. It may be a group, which often is the case for pastoral, and balance those in a way. And that balance, by the way, I mean, is kind of the tricky part, because nowhere is there only societal rights to land or only individual rights to land. People often mistake that too. And so a big part of what we do is trying to get that balance right and figure out what the societal or the larger group and who that group is, and then the individual, and achieve an appropriate balance.
Congratulations, Mr. Hansard. I'm a student from the South China Technology of University, and I have a question just about, I'm so interested in your property rights. Yeah, so I think that the difference between the higher income and the lower, and as we just said, is the gap of the wealth, and has become larger and larger. And so just so we can see in the southeast of China and the west. So I think the policy was lasting so long. What do you think about the policy and the lagged effect? What's the influence towards the land rights and the chance about the lagged effect about the policy? What do you think about it? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure I understand the question right, but it's the lag between the
lag between the it's the policy lagged. Yeah. Just we says the gap between the higher incomes and the lower incomes. But we always said that the policy was started, but just about 5 years later, not some effect. It's not the effect about this is not clear. Yeah. So I think, what about the solutions or the chance in the future? Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if this is going to directly address it, but I will just say broadly, I do think economic inequality is a big problem, and it's a problem in many societies, including my own. I think in looking at the problem of economic equality broadly, the solutions can't be just about redistributing income and wealth, but I mean, not that can't be part of it through a progressive tax structure and other things, but you have to look at opportunity, because if you don't make some effort to try to equalize opportunity from the beginning, addressing the symptoms of redistribution, I think you'll get into problems. And I fear that in the broader policies that we're not looking as much as the difference between opportunity. How much mobility is there within the society? Do people who are in the bottom quintile or quartile really have chances to move up? Are they moving up? If not, why not? And be focusing on that as much as you are about just the redistribution of the outcomes.
Thank you.
Well, I guess it's just time. And thank you very much for sharing pretty much a lifetime of experience with us about your endeavors and effort to help the poor. And thank you for bringing that message to Hong Kong and to this university. We congratulate you on your award and the prize. And remember, it's a highly leveraged business. So 5 years from now, you will more or less alleviate poverty, hopefully. And please, thank you for all being here. and show your appreciation to the speaker and to congratulate the Institute. Thank you very much.